This is the part 1 of the story titled My Husband the Heavyweight Champion, and this video is dedicated to late Minister Osinachi Nwachukwu, may her soul rest in peace. And this is Mr. Nwachi and his wife, Mrs. Nwachi. This is not a beautiful morning for Mrs. Nwachi simply because she asked her husband for money for food. And this is Mr. Enenche, the landlord to Mr. Nwachi. This morning he heard some noise coming from Mr. Nwachi's apartment, so he had to come outside to know what is going on. He came out and peeped and heard a lot of noise coming out from his apartment, Mr. Nwachi's apartment. It was Mr. Nwachi and his wife quarreling as usual. He peeped and peeped, and all of a sudden Mr. Nwachi rushes out of the house and outside the compound. The landlord stood there for a while and went back inside. From the look of things, the landlord, Mr. Enenche, has been observing Mr. Nwachi and his wife for some times now, and at the same time thinking of what to do to make peace between the couple. Mr. Enenche seems like a nice landlord, and all he wants is peace in the environment. And he must do everything possible to restore peace between Mr. and Mrs. Nwachi. Later in the evening, Mrs. Nwachi came out in front of the house looking so sad with her hand bandaged. The landlord came out simply to know if Mrs. Nwachi will complain to him and for him to know where to start helping her, but Mrs. Nwachi kept quiet, and it seems she didn't want anybody to know what was going on. Few days after, another fight broke out between Mr. Nwachi and Mrs. Nwachi. Everything in the house started flying outside, and the landlord came out to peep as usual, and something happened. They nearly broke his head with a cell phone they threw outside the room, and they flew over his head and scattered on the ground. The landlord went to pick the handset and left with the handset, and the fight continued. Within a short time, as usual, Mr. Nwachi rushed out and outside the compound, and Mrs. Nwachi came out to pack everything that was thrown outside back inside the house as if nothing happened. And the landlord went aside to put the cell phone together, and after putting the cell phone together, he searched for a number to call, a number that is related to Mrs. Nwachi. He found a number written "My brother," and he called the number. Fortunately, the number belonged to Mrs. Nwachi's brother. The landlord called him, Mrs. Nwachi's brother, and told him exactly what is going on and asked him to rush immediately and do something to save his sister. After the call, he pretended as if nothing happened. Few hours later, he brought the phone to give it back to Mrs. Nwachi, knowing fully well that the brother would soon call her on the phone. And when Mrs. Nwachi opened the door, she snatched the phone away from the landlord and rushed back inside. The landlord was shocked at her actions towards him, but he had nothing to say and he left. Later in the evening, Mrs. Nwachi was outside when the brother called. She was surprised because the brother has not been calling her on phone for some times. Now she picked the call to know why the brother called. and the brother told her exactly what was going on in her house and blamed her for not telling anybody and promised her that he is coming immediately to deal with the husband. She was not comfortable with that because she's been hiding her situation and never wanted anybody to know about that. She had to rush to the gate to lock the gate to prevent the brother from coming into the compound. She locked the gate and stood aside, knowing fully well that her brother will eventually come immediately after dropping the call. She locked the gate and was waiting aside, and lo and behold, the brother came and the key was locked. He was there dragging the key, making all effort to open the gate, but all to no avail. The landlord noticed what was happening. He came out to observe to be sure of what was happening. He saw Mrs. Nwachi standing aside and saw the gate locked. He found out that it was Mrs. Nwachi's brother that was doing at the gate. Now he discovered that Mrs. Nwachi is hiding her situation and she didn't want anybody to help her. Thank you so much, and please, before we conclude this story, what is your advice to the landlord, Mr. Enenche, and what is your advice to this couple? Drop your advice on comment section as I see you next time with the part 2 and the conclusion of this story.
Você passa. Tuama. Mba. Tuoko. Ngwa tuama. Iguje ọma ejegori. Ngwa tuwa bucket. Wole bucket.
Thank you so much for being here with us in House of the Sons Global, watching our videos. My phone number is on the screen and I will love to hear from you. Please follow us on our social media platforms on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, and don't forget to share our videos with your friends, okay? And please, if you want to support House of the Sons Global financially, the account information is on the screen. Thank you so much, and don't forget, this is House of the Sons Global.